Are you trying to dominate your fantasy football league? Do you want so many championship rings it's impossible to sign autographs? Well, crack open a beer, pour yourself a glass of bourbon, and settle in, because you've come to the right place. Welcome to Hammercast.
Welcome to the Double D's podcast, which is part of the Hammercast network. I'm your host, Kevin Coleman, and on this episode of the podcast, we have special guest Bob Van, who is a writer for Fantasy Six Pack and a contributor to Dynasty Rewind. Sorry, I have a hard problem in my R's there. Bob, thanks for coming on. Why don't you tell our listeners some work that you've been doing recently and just a little bit about kind of your content?
No problem. Thanks for having me. So lately, I've been doing a lot of work preparing for the NFL draft. I've been cranking out some draft profiles at Fantasy Six Pack, as well as working with the Dynasty Rewind boys, breaking down film, going through some of the offensive prospects as well as defensive prospects. Mm-hmm. Like last week, we talked about Senior Bowl guys and standouts there, and some people who stock went up, stock went down. So we did that. And just looking forward to cranking out a ton more draft content over the next couple months, because that's really all we got to look forward to. And then, obviously we have free agency as well, but it's going to be a nice long road. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, man, no worries. I wanted to get you on because IDP is definitely not anything that I'm comfortable with, and I needed a guy that I felt like I followed you for a couple months now, probably 3 months now. I'm getting older now. And I always enjoyed your content, what you wrote. And plus, you kind of just write stuff for my Cowboys, too. I like to what we're going to get here in the future. So I appreciate you coming on, and as everybody said yesterday and today on social media, it's draft season now. So we all know it's draft season. We're in it. So the first part of the show, what we're going to do is we're just going to talk to you guys about what IDP is. And because a lot of our listeners, I know some of them just don't play in this kind of league. And every time I hear I don't have the time for it. And then on the other side, I always get the IDP guys like, you need to open up the field. This is where it's at. You got to open up the game. Why would you just play one side of the ball? So I get that. I'm a strictly no defense guy in terms of just team defenses. But I think that maybe adding this to my game would be great. So first thing I want to kind of talk about, and because this is relevant to me because I do Devy, and I think I always tell them, hey, Devy really opens up the game. It really helps you as a fantasy person. It helps you as a manager. It helps you with these rookies. So for me, why would it be good for someone like me to join a league?
So my big thing on why I joined IDP was because I've always been a huge fan of defense. Mm-hmm. So being able to implement defensive players individually, that IDP stands for individual defensive player, just for basis. But that was always my big thing, was I love defense. So being able to implement them into my roster and implement them in a game plan for how I'm going to form this dynasty team was always kind of a cool way to open up the game. And how it's impacted me is it's kind of given me a better understanding of how the game works. And it kind of also gives you an in on why an offensive player might play well against this defense or that defense, because you know exactly who's on the other side of the ball. So that's been one reason I like to get into it. It is a lot more, I wouldn't say a lot more research, but it's a good amount more. Mm-hmm. When you get a feel for it and get your feet wet, it's kind of, just upkeep at that point, which is the same with offense. There's a lot of parallels. It may seem intimidating at first, and it definitely is. When I first got into it, I wasn't great, and that's how it is. That's the nature of the game. But I think the fear element comes from just unfamiliarity, but there are a lot of parallels. And I think it's just a matter of making the jump and getting on into it,
I think about this stuff, and we have a lot of different guys come on. They talk about corner wide receiver matchups and who you should start. But I guess you make a good point with knowing, if you know what defensive players aren't playing well and your matchup against them in an offensive league, then that's an advantage to you. That's a good call. I don't know why I never even thought about that. That's why I bring smarter people on here, guys, because I don't think about these type of things. But you are researching those guys. I've never actually done it, but I could imagine that you get pretty well in depth with these guys and these teams and these leagues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a stupid memory recall. So, I can almost tell you every coach in the league, every defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, some assistant coaches and why these assistant coaches are great, who has better coaching staffs and all this dumb stuff that I'll never need to use in real life. But, I just get into it. And for people who IDP is great for people who want to understand the game better as a whole, not just the offense, and people who, love Dynasty especially, or Devi, would be a great, if you like Devi, you'll probably like IDP, unless you just don't like defense, take your pick. But, ultimately, like I said, for me, it's just given me a great understanding of the game, and it makes me appreciate it more. You have more guys to root and cheer for and grow an attachment to, which I think is, a big part of fantasy is you have your guys that you love and you like watching play. And I think that's just, a bigger part of the game.
No, hey, it's fair. And I think that's a good point. I mean, your guys are your coaches, and coaches are a big standpoint too, and how they run their defense. And I mean, your Packers fired their defensive coach. It's probably a good call. That was probably coming. So those are the type of things that, you got to understand. And I like that point. Now, when we get into this, if people are getting involved, and I think I'm not sure because I am not IDP guy, but I know that scoring seems to be a little bit of a controversial topic with IDP guys out there. I feel like it's kind of like analytics and, film guys. I feel like that battle, it's like the scoring battle.
You are 100% correct. There's a big, not fight, but definitely a chasm between the two.
Yeah.
In terms of, having a standard and what the standard should be versus, just free scoring, which I think is fine too. My thing is I personally really like the IDP 1-2-3 scoring system.
Okay.
It kind of breaks it into fewer tiers and makes it a little more streamlined in terms of, some of the scoring I think is a little not necessarily aggressive, but high. And I think it's kind of scary to some people because it's like for example, like a sack is 6 points, by itself. Then you get the tackle, then you get the tackle for loss. So it's a 10-point play. So it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of scary if you think about it. But if you think about it, these guys aren't getting touchdowns, they're not getting yardage, except interception return yards and fumble return yards, but those are pretty rare. So I mean, it is kind of, I guess, scary to, when you first look at it, especially when a lot of the standard, quote unquote, is like 2 points for an interception, 2 points for a fumble recovery, because a lot of sites use the standard for team defensive scoring for their standard, because it doesn't really do the IDP player justice, in my opinion. It just kind of, and it especially when you have them in a league where, for example, like Bobby Wagner, Devin White, Darius Leonard, these guys are like IDP studs. And if they're in the wrong scoring, if you match them up against, the Devontae Adams, the Christian McCaffreys when he's healthy, of the world, they're not going to look nearly as similar. But if you take them with IDP 1-2-3 scoring, or even a IDP friendly scoring, as I like to call it, they'll actually, hold a candle to these guys and be worth drafting at a appropriate spot. As where I was in a league last year that I left solely because the IDP scoring was terrible. Just like it was a 0.5 for an assisted tackle, 1 point for a solo tackle. And then even like sacks and stuff was like 2 points, and interception was 2. And I'm like, this sucks. Like, why do we even have IDP at this point? And, and I talked to the commission, he just wasn't budging. And I'm like, well, that's cool by me, but I'm I'm not about it. Sorry. And I'm a big proponent of the IDP 1-2-3. I think it's, a good baseline for being able to talk about players. And then the thing is too, I'm full, customize it how you like it. If you think sacks should be a little less, okay, or if you think, assisted tackle should be a little more, a little less, go ahead. I think the problem is too many people want this standard and too many people want total free scoring. But, if they just meet in the middle and say like, hey, we can have this nice little standard, but customize it how you like. Yeah, I don't know.
You're trying to get people to agree now. That's not going to ever happen.
Right. I know. And I'm taking a terrible stand there, but
I feel like it's kind of like the argument, like standard leagues versus PPR, right? In a way, like just kind of like, there's some guys that just do not want to move on from standard, and just getting them to go to half PPR is like pulling teeth. And then PPR is like, I can't do that. What are you talking about? So I think from an offensive perspective of some guy who doesn't really play it, I could see that kind of this old guard, like, well, it should be this, but no, I think you should reward the best players. There's always got to be that separate. That's why I love PPR leagues, because CMC should be getting you that many points over some guy like Leonard Fournette. Like, that's just how that should work. And so I feel like it's kind of, if it's fair to say, it's kind of like PPR and standard in a way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's, that's kind of because all it is it's just a jump in points. Yeah. And that's what, PPR really reflects what wide receivers or running backs even are getting targeted more and making catches and how they're impacting the game. And that's why, IDP 123 really emphasizes how, well players are playing, these impact players. Like TJ Watt in IDP 123 was the top scoring player last year. Yeah. And he should have been, 15 some sacks, tackles for loss are big plays. It rewards impact plays, but also keeps the baseline for tackles, which is a baseline for a lot of players. Yeah. So it's, that's fair to say.
Well, I'm glad you brought him up. So we're going to deviate a little. I want to know, who do you think should have won Defensive Player of the Year then? TJ Watt or Aaron Donald? Who are you, Bob? Let's hear it. Let's hear you piss off half of the community.
I know. The thing is, I can't just say like, oh, Aaron Donald shouldn't get it. Yeah. Because, he impacts, and I'll get to this a little later too with talking about interior defensive linemen. Yeah. With IDP at least, and real life football. But, TJ Watt, nails all the stat columns. But what, isn't quantified as well in that is pressure rates, win rate, stuff like that. And that's where Aaron Donald just, he's such a winner on the field, and he eats double teams, eats triple teams, and, still finds a way to pressure the quarterback on a reasonable basis. Whereas TJ Watt isn't getting double as much, and he's still not, I think his win rate is close, but I think his 2-on-1 is a lot lower, but and it's easier to double somebody where they're lining up on three interior offensive linemen, whereas the edge or outside linebacker is, against a tackle, and then it's harder you're either getting double teamed by a tight end or the guard is shifting over. But so, I mean, it's a tough argument. I think I would have liked to see TJ Watt get it, but I get the Aaron Donald pick solely because, he's not gonna light up stat columns with his position really. And when he does, I mean, that's a hell of a year, so
Aaron Donald's a stud.
Yeah. I mean, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but
it would have been cool to see someone else get it. But if you watch Aaron Donald, I watch the Rams a lot, and for some reason they're always on my TV. But if you watch how much he impacts that game, he's one of the best players I've ever seen play defense in my time. And I'm not that old, not all that time. So I've gotten to see those guys, but I love the argument. We'll move on a little bit, but I think they both were deserving, and they could have went either way, right? That's just kind of one of those things. So now let's talk. So everybody listening, when you let's say you do jump in and you want to do IDP, and you're like, hey, I want to do a startup, okay? And a startup season's happening. People have been starting up since January, which is insane to me. But I think one thing is that initial drafts can be kind of daunting because you're like, okay, when do I take guys on the defensive side? So when you're doing it, is there a baseline of like, okay, I know round 8, or I know every round draft is different. I know that. I understand that. And to guys out there listening, it can just be basis on your league. But is there a baseline of when you're drafting IDP players in a startup, or, what players do you like to target first? What are those kind of, where are you at with that?
So there's a ton of nuance to it, obviously. A lot of it comes down to scoring. If it's IDP friendly, I've seen players, and I'm okay with like 5th, 6th round. Mm-hmm. Just because the bigger running backs are off the board. I'd always prefer a running back over most IDP players. except for the studs. And I mean, at that point too, you should only be targeting the stud players, the TJ Watts, the Devin Whites, the Darius Leonards. Don't want to forget him. Targeting these, absolute studs. But I usually prefer to wait a little later. Solely because there's a lot less depth on the offensive side, solely because IDP is still, for whatever reason, such an unknown that a lot of people don't put a lot of weight on IDP players. And as terrible as it is to say, I like to take advantage of that. So usually, and there's not ever usually a big run on defense until maybe later in the draft. So you don't necessarily have to pull the trigger that early. But you can, especially for those stud players that if you got 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and you're set to go, or if it's super flex, obviously you're getting quarterbacks into the mix earlier. But, if you have a solid, stud at running back, stud at wide receiver, and whatever, I'm not opposed to the 5th, 6th round in a startup. If it's friendly scoring like IDP 1, 2, 3, I'd have no issue with that. If it's less friendly, I'm not looking till double digits. I want my starting roster full before I even think about IDP.
Okay, so it's kind of scoring based. Hey, this is kind of where I need to look at. But I understand those guys. Is there a position that, I guess it just depends on how they weight it, but like, is there a position? Because I always hear people fighting about cornerbacks, and I don't know how real this is. Again, I'm novice here. Corners or defensive linemen. And again, where do you find yourself always drafting early?
So for sure. I'm a big linebacker guy. Linebackers are the running back of the defensive side of the ball. They get the most tackles, so they have a good baseline. And then if you have guys that make a lot of splash plays, like Devin White, he had an incredible year, incredible season. If that's the type of guy I would want to look at that at like 4th, 5th, 6th round, depending on what I have. But and then you did mention there's definitely a disparity between corners versus safeties. Corners are very, very nuanced. Some are not, like Jalen Ramsey. He's a great real life corner, but he does not translate to IDP scoring. And he just doesn't, because his coverage is so great that, unless he's getting an interception, he's not doing a lot for you. And that's one thing that kind of sucks with, like, there's no way to justify it. He just doesn't get looked at.
Yeah.
So, he takes players off the board more than anything. But, and then your safeties, they're the ones that are more, able to help and run support. They also, pass deflections, interceptions, stuff like that. So they're a lot more able to, I like to compare them to wide receivers, oddly enough, on the offensive side, where they're also fairly consistent, but they do have boom and bust games more often than not, because they usually make a play or two, or they don't. And then, so linebackers are running backs, DBs are wide receivers, and then defensive linemen are usually kind of like tight ends, where very boom or bust, except for the top tier guys. And it's just kind of a simplistic way of looking at it. But whenever I tell somebody who's starting out, it's like, this is how I look at it. Day one, first time looking at IDP, this is how you should kind of appropriate value. And obviously scoring comes into play and stuff like that, but that's, too much nuance to get into for this time allotted. So, but yeah, I mean, I like to go linebacker first. It's a position I also feel like I'm best at evaluating talent wise. So I think I have a bias there to an extent. But yeah.
No, I mean, that's good. Thank you for giving me that kind of rundown of like, hey, this is, this equals this. It's easy for me, especially if I'm going into a draft, and it'll be a little harder for me because I'm a zero running back guy. Don't shoot me out there, but I understand kind of what you mean. Like, hey, this is my linebacker. This is my core. I got to build around this core. So those of you listening and seeing on either on the pod or YouTube or whatever right now, that's a great translation for us, because newbies like me, like if I have it in the league, I'm gonna be following this guy and sending him messages and telling me, okay, where am I at? What should I do here? Because you really got to translate well, especially in IDP leagues. You don't want to fall behind, because I have a feeling that if you draft wrong in IDP league, that could really put you back in your dynasty kind of area. Because with so many players, is that true? You got to make sure you kind of hit for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, it is deeper. It depends on the depth of the league. If it's a really deep league, like if it's a 12 team where you're starting a full defensive, like 3 linebackers, 3 DBs, 2 DLs, and a couple flexes, you're going to be in trouble in a 12 plus team league. Especially if there's, any bench in a league like that, which you need a bench in a league like that. But, if you're able to hit on even, if you're able to hit like 3/4 and you're probably going to be good.
Okay.
Because it is so deep and things happen, context is so huge in IDP. And you're more likely to be able to kind of pick up somebody off waivers because there are so many more positions. Because if you think about it, there's 11 startable players on an IDP defense of a team, whereas on an offense, you lose the 5 linemen.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more to kind of pull from. I would say, though, that it's harder to navigate if you don't have a great pulse on the team, or if you're not following somebody who is able to kind of pinpoint, like, hey, if this guy was out, this is the guy to go for. Because I kind of went on a war on blurbers this year, where, it was my prime example was AJ Klein, who filled in for Matt Milano. And one of the first the first blurb that came out when Matt Milano went on IR the first time was, this guy, Andre Smith, is going to be the one taking over for the position for him.
Yeah.
And it's because on Our Lads, the depth chart site that is not that reliable, says that Andre Smith is number 2 in line behind Matt Milano. And I'm like, okay, well, I know that's wrong. So I went on, lineups because I saw that AJ Klein was taking more snaps and he filled in the snaps that Matt Milano missed. And I'm like, so, don't always trust the blurbers, man, because they are not, and like I said, sorry for the tangent, but man, I went on a little bit of a rant or a couple during the season where I'm like, man, you got to be careful with these guys because they're, if you would have started Andre Smith, he played 2 snaps that game.
Yeah.
And it's like if you were looking for 5 points out of the guy, you didn't get it. But if you started AJ Klein, you got 20 points. So it's like,
it's just kind of like you got to know, for you guys, BC Johnson for Minnesota, they were talking about him being wide receiver 2 because Justin Jefferson wasn't doing good in training camp. That stuff, you just got to laugh about that kind of stuff. You got to be careful with our lads, depth chart. Don't get mad at me, but I literally just Googled up who Milano was, and that's a good pick by you. I like that. So you got to know these guys. Is there, to kind of wrap up the last kind of thing about drafts and like who to draft, is there an age cliff? So for example, like I know running backs, in Dynasty, they're dead at 27. That's what everybody talks about. Hey, you don't want to get a guy, everybody kind of mentions it. Wide receivers, I would usually say 30, 31. You start like, okay, where is that age cliffs? Are there particular age cliffs for, defensive players, or it just kind of just depends on who they bring in, what their scheme is like?
Yeah. It's weird. I think a lot of them, if they're good, they can play forever. Okay. Malcolm Jenkins, safety for the New Orleans Saints, prime example. He's been a great commodity for the better part of I want to say going on 12 years now. And he's not going anywhere. I want to say there was rumors he was going to retire, but I don't know if those came to be true or not. But if you're good enough to play the position, you'll be there. I don't think a lot of Antoine Bethea, he just retired last year. He played on the Colts and the Cardinals, the Colts, he was there for a while, and the Cardinals, and I think the Giants for a while. But
Bethea was a stud. I love watching Bethea play.
And he was an old guy by the time he called it. So I don't know. I don't think there's any production cliff that anybody goes off. I think it's just a lot of the time they kind of have their replacement ready and then they just kind of go. There's not a huge dip in production. It's there, but it's not like deadly, when it hits, but it's an interesting question, but yeah.
I don't know. You're the research guy. Maybe you could look that up for me. For example, Devin McCourty, is that a guy that you'd be worried about drafting, or are you kind of late round maybe?
Late round, maybe. I probably won't be drafting him personally.
Yeah. All right. I'm just trying to. I'm bringing up my knowledge of these old dudes.
Sure. Yeah.
Head, trying to.
You're good.
Don't draft a Cowboys linebacker, though. They always get hurt. What we're going to kind of switch to while we're here, and I'm really excited about this because this guy's got me looking up friggin' YouTube clips and film on these guys. And we're going to be talking about can't miss prospects. So what we're doing right now, we're going to be talking about the 2021 draft class, can't miss prospects here of guys that we really like. And, I want him to go through this. We're going to go over 3 or 4 can't miss prospects first that he absolutely loves. I have a feeling I know a few of them, but I would like to hear what he has to say about those guys. And then we're going to kind of go through the draft class and just pick up on some guys that I kind of want to know more about and go from there. So why don't you start with your first one? Who's the first guy that you're looking for, you're excited about being in the league?
The first one's got to be Micah Parsons, linebacker out of Penn State. The guy's just an animal. I mean, everyone will say he's the best linebacker prospect since Kuechly, which isn't really true. Kuechly was known for his ability to read the offense and play recognition. But that's not necessarily Parsons' thing. He's very instinctual, but if you hit him with any misdirection, he's a little slow to the punch. But other than that, I mean, he's a great pass rusher. And I forget what outlet said it, but I guess he feels like he's a pass rusher at heart. That's what he was in high school. And then he converted to linebacker when he got to Penn State, actually committed as a D end and then flipped to linebacker.
Yeah.
But everything you want in a playmaking linebacker, he's got it. I think he might take a year to kind of adjust, but I think he's going to be a day one starter. He's going to, be an impact player, kind of like Patrick Queen was for the Ravens this year. I think he's going to be kind of hit or miss some days, but he's going to have his days where he makes some serious plays. And I think that's about all I got for him. But
he's a big boy. I mean, 6'3", 245. I think he's, he can be kind of that. I don't know what you think. What do you think about the linebacking class in this class overall? Just kind of because Parsons probably the guy, right? And then after that, it gets kind of because when I was looking at it, the linebacking class for me was kind of it's okay. I love how high do you think a guy like Parsons could go? Do you have a team for him at all?
I have him mocked currently to the Detroit Lions at 7.
Oh wow.
So I think this is kind of one of the I really wish he would have played this year.
Yeah.
But he elected to opt out and prepare for the draft, which I'm fine with. I don't I'm not going to hold that against a guy, especially if he's using that time to really prepare for the draft and be prepared for pro days and evaluations and stuff like that and getting his body NFL ready. If he's doing all that, checking all those boxes, I am big in on Micah Parsons. He'll be my LB1, and it's not really going to be close for fantasy and real life. But I love the guy. I think he's set to go off, and I like him in Detroit. They get Dan Campbell's going to want people that can bite off some kneecaps, and Micah Parsons will set a tone like that on that defense. So that's why he's kind of a mock lock for me there.
I like that. That's about as high as I've seen him go. But we know Detroit needs that help they need help generally on everything. But I think that defensive side is where we could go. I've seen him go. I saw somebody put him at 15 to the Patriots as well. I don't know if he'll. You don't like that part?
I just think it's low. That's all.
Okay.
I think that's a big fall for him. And if I am kind of projecting falls for people who opted out. I'm projecting Jamar Chase to 11 to the Giants. And that's a huge fall from most people. And I just think a lot of that's not having film on the guy the last year. And he's same deal. He opted out to go train basically and not play with a terrible quarterback. But
yeah, hey man, why you got to throw LSU's quarterback under the bus like that? No, I get it. He did have that. I think the opt-out guys, the pro day is massive. Like they got to make sure they hit that pro day and get these teams to fall in love with them. And a guy like Parsons, who is an athletic freak, could do that. And so I could see that. All right, who's another guy? Who else you got here?
I also really like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Okay. Big name drop there. He's linebacker out of Notre Dame, and he's he's kind of an odd character because he's kind of smaller, which is not great. I want to say he's around 220, 215, 220, 6'2"-ish. So he's a little on the smaller side, but he doesn't look it. But he's great in coverage. He's a big coverage guy. And he can make the tackles and he makes plays. A big thing with these IDP guys is you need guys that attack all stat columns. You need guys that aren't, and Parsons is the same way. Where they're not just getting tackles, they're getting forced fumbles, fumble recoveries. They're always around the ball. They're getting interceptions, pass deflections, you name it, sacks. They're always around the ball, and these are the guys that are just going to be great for your fantasy team and probably great in the NFL, especially great in a as a coverage linebacker. A guy who can cover the flat, cover a wheel route on a running back, stuff like that. That's really valuable in today's NFL with these running backs that can catch out of the backfield and these tight ends that are uber athletic. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah can do that for you.
I looked at his size and I'm like, man, 6 points. But I mean, you talked about it. He could probably play a little box safety, right? He could probably move back there and slot. And cover the slot.
Yeah, I think he'll stick at linebacker. I think they'll get him on that NFL peanut butter diet or whatever it is. And they'll get him kind of beefed up a little bit. If they can get him to 225, 230, I have no worries. I think honestly, if he played safety though, I think he could be damn near elite. But I don't think that's going to be in his game. I think he's best suited for being closer to the line of scrimmage, being able to blitz quarterback, and make his reads from there. I don't think he's a Mike linebacker. I think he's better suited for like a weak side. That's an odd thing about this draft. I don't really think there's a great Mike linebacker, anybody who's going to be calling plays. Excuse me. But, a lot of them are more these, wing guys where they're, best suited for, a fancy scheme where they're going to be kind of utilized all over the place. I want to say my comp for him was Zach Cunningham, linebacker of the Houston Texans. Just kind of that, he's kind of that, taller, kind of lanky, but he's kind of a do-everything playmaker type. And I like him a lot. I think I currently have him mocked to the Miami Dolphins.
Oh.
And the reason being is I really like that scheme's kind of a do-everything scheme. It's kind of ambiguous in how they use their linebackers. They kind of use them all over. They have usually a run stuffing one and then one that just kind of does everything.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how good that'd be for fantasy, but I think that'd be a great, professional fit for him where he'd be able to really shine as a good linebacker. So.
Yeah, and I think Brian Flores is one of the best defensive coaches in the league. I think he can put those guys in the right spots and do those things. And I think we found your type, Bob, linebackers, right? Like that's your type.
I love linebackers, dude. They're easily my favorite position to evaluate. I like DBs too. I almost say that I'm better at evaluating DBs, but I really like evaluating linebackers. I just like the guys that'll come up and hit you in the mouth and, set a tone. And the thing with JOK, I call him save some time. But, he's a big hitter too. And he, at his size, he's laying hits out there. He's not some schmuck out there who's going to lazy tackle you. He's going to get you down and he's going to hit you. He's going to make you know he's there. So.
Yeah, well, good. I like that. Hey, old school football here. Okay, you must be around my age. How old are you, Bob?
I'm 27.
Oh nope, shit, I'm too old. All right, let's move on. All right, now let's look at the next prospect here. Is a linebacker or no? Are we moving on?
Nope, I pivoted. All
right, nice. Let's pivot. What do you got?
So this guy is probably not going to be on a ton of people's radars right now, but he will be probably as we get closer to the draft. His name is Hamza Nasruddin, safety out of Florida State. What I really like about him, and I like him more as this is more of like a guy for fantasy than necessarily real life. I think he's going to be your typical classic box safety. Mm-hmm. He's not great in coverage, but man, he's a tackler. He's a heavy hitter. He did a good job actually in coverage on when they covered wide receiver and tight ends. He did a lot better against tight ends and wide receivers. I wouldn't say that I'm super sold on his coverage because the tight ends there at the Senior Bowl were not, they weren't Kyle Pitts. They were, these guys who probably aren't even day two prospects. So, take it for what you will. I mean, he still did a good job covering who was there. He can't decide who he's covering necessarily. But that's not really his game. His game is going to be downhill, box safety type, hybrid. Not going to be he's going to be maybe a zone coverage guy, but he's not. Your coverage is not going to be his game. Yeah. But he's a guy, similar to, I wouldn't say, he's more Taylor Rapp than Jeremy Chin. Okay. Where he's not a coverage guy, but he'll sit in the box, he'll come down and help. He's probably not going to be an every down guy because of his pass inability to cover the pass sometimes. But like I said, I really like him as a heavy. I like guys that heavy hit. So
yeah, he's massive, dude. Like, you're looking up his number, 6'4", 220, basically. Like, that's a big ass safety. That's a guy that's gonna come up and fill that box. And I like that the safety position in this. I know because I've wanted the Cowboys to draft a safety for about 15 years now, it feels like. So I always look up safeties and kind of like where are they at. The safety position is definitely one that's it's wild card. I feel like it's a wild card out there, and you got to really try to find that one. And any of these guys, I feel like, can kind of step in, and they all have their different inabilities to do something. They all have their deficiencies, but he's kind of an athlete. 6'4", 220 just makes me happy to see that those numbers there.
Yep.
All right. Do you have another one, or do you have?
Yeah, I got one more guy. I don't know. He's my favorite defensive lineman.
Okay.
And that's Patrick Jones, the second out of Pitt. He's a guy that, the second I saw his film, I think I was watching film on somebody else, and I was like, who the heck is that guy? I wish I remember, but he just popped off the film right at me, and I was like, this guy is going to be good. His get off the line is the best in the class that I've seen. He gets off the, ball snaps, he's gone. On top of that, he's got a full toolkit. He has a spin move, he has a swim move, and then his bull rush ain't great, but he's not a power rusher. He's more of a finesse guy. But he's not weak. But he's quick, slick, and I think he's a probably a later first round prospect, but he's a guy that I've really fallen in love with. He's going to be all over my timeline on Twitter as we approach the draft. When he gets drafted, I'm going to be a very happy person because I'm excited to see what he does in the NFL.
So you think he's going to go late first, kind of maybe early second in that category?
I believe I have him mocked to the Ravens.
Okay.
At 27 or whatever that is. So
that would be a good pickup by the Ravens. They kind of need that younger guy to get in there and have that edge rusher. All right, good. Yeah. So what we're going to do now, so he went through his kind of guys, his can't miss prospect, his guys, right? We all have those guys. And so I we're going to just go through some, strengths, weaknesses of the classes. We've kind of already generally talked about it, but it'll be a little quicker, but of each position, and kind of talk about some guys that maybe we know of or he knows of in particular players. So defensive line is one that I want to know what you think of the class as a whole, because they don't have this class doesn't have these guys. Like, there's not a lot of defensive players mocked in the top 10, which is different, right? We're used to seeing these guys. So what do we need to know about the defensive line?
So you mentioned that with defensive line and defensive end. Yeah. Positions both as a whole. There's not a generational prospect this year. There's no Nick Bosa, there's no Quinnen Williams, there's no this big guy. And I think, one guy to mention, I think Gregory Rousseau might have been if he played this year, but he opted out. But for interior defensive linemen, I really like Christian Barmore out of Alabama. He is probably my favorite interior defensive lineman. Marvin Wilson, obviously, and then Jalen Twyman. He's he's also on that Pitt defensive line. Those are my probably three big interior defensive linemen. And then when we get to defensive end, it's a weird class because there's no one big guy, but there is going to be one or two of these guys that hit, and they're going to hit big. I'd say that they're a bit more developmental than most years. I got my guy Patrick Jones. He's my favorite. Gregory Rousseau, who I just mentioned, and then Kwity Paye. Kwity Paye is a guy that if anybody's mocking in the top 10, it's probably him.
Okay.
I actually a buddy of mine at the Fantasy Six Pack mocked Gregory Rousseau to number 2 to the Jets. Which, like I said, if he would have played this year, there's a chance. I'm not a Gregory Rousseau fan, so I'm not going to be mocking him that high. But yeah, so the defensive end and interior defensive line is weird this year because it's just there's no guy, there's no just stud interior or edge defensive lineman this year that really sticks out. It's very ambiguous. But that again, like I said, one of these guys is going to hit. And if you can pick the right one for your fantasy team, if you're a team draft this guy, I think they get that guy is Patrick Jones. We'll see. But it's an odd class, man.
It is. You mentioned him, and I kind of want to talk about him a little bit more. Kwity Paye, my guy, Kwity Paye from Michigan. I'm a Michigan guy, unfortunately too. I just pick bad kid football teams, guys out there. But I've watched Kwity play pretty consistently. I think that when I watch him, and I could be jaded Wolverine, so take my my scouting with a grain of salt there, but I think that he's going to get overdrafted. I feel like he might get taken too high for his expectations of what they're going to be because he's got to develop. He's a big guy, 6'4", 275 probably. He's a massive dude. I just feel like he's going to get picked by a team in the top 15-ish range, and they're going to be like, hey, why aren't you game changing? Why aren't you a game changer? What's happening? So for me personally, I want to know what you think about that. Do you think he's going to get overdrafted?
Yeah. Like I said, I think, there are a lot of people who have him drafted in the top 10 that I've seen, or not a lot, but, I've seen him up there. My big knock on him is I don't think he's a bad player. I think, like you mentioned, he's developmentally needs some polish.
Yeah.
The one thing I hated about his tape was the way he comes off the ball. Instead of using his power to go forward, he pops up and then runs forward.
Yeah.
And that drives me nuts because he's losing time to get out to the pass rusher. He's losing all of his energy that he could have put forward. And if somebody can coach that out of him, man, I think he's got talent. He's not bad. But that was the one thing I noticed on tape so much is that his first move is to pop up. And right away, so you lose your leverage, you lose your speed, you lose your burst right away. And the fact that he was able to do okay with, doing that.
Yeah.
If he can polish that up a little bit, I think, that would be a big step for him. But yeah, no, I definitely think he's overdrafted. I think I got him. I want to say he's a mock lock from me to the Chargers at 13.
Okay.
Yeah. So to fill in for the either retiring or cut Melvin Ingram. So.
Okay, no, that would hurt my Herbert shares because I want them to draft Pitts, so I don't really appreciate that. But yeah, no, I like that. I think Kwity, I like that you said, hey, they could coach it out of him because they can. Michigan's defense's coordinators, Don Brown, just got fired finally, thank God. But you got to look at those things like they've needed help there. So, but I think just timid, make sure you temper your expectations with Kwity Paye because he can be very frustrating. And I think he's going to take a year. But I think after a year, if he falls in the right spot, that he'll be pretty good there. So I just like to kind of drop some knowledge every once in a while just because I know that guy. So I just needed to get in here and act like I know what I was talking about. We've talked about linebackers, but if you have a couple more of what you think there, and then we'll just go. We'll go corners. We'll kind of talk about all of it.
Sure. So obviously Parsons, JOK, top 2. Nick Bolton out of, I believe, Southern Mississippi or Missouri, Mizzou, whatever. And then Zaven Collins are probably my big 4. Zaven Collins is the guy I'll touch on first. He's an interesting prospect to me because he's one of those guys who lit up stat sheets, lit it up out of a no-name school, not no-name, but a smaller school, Tulsa. And he lit it up, and I was, there's a lot of hype on him. He was he won the award or whatever for being the best defensive player in college this year. And I went to watch his film, and I was unimpressed. And I know I'm gonna be in a very small camp by myself, but it just looks like he's probably the fastest player on the field, but he still looks slow.
Yeah.
And I think that's, there's still something to be said that he has to go out and make all these plays, so kudos to him. But, he's a guy that I think needs to be developed too, and like I said, he doesn't look fast. And if they're going to ask him to play an off-ball linebacker position, he's going to struggle, in my opinion. If he's converted to like a down linebacker edge hybrid, we can talk, because he was able to get after the passer. He's got the height and the frame for it, that I think he could excel at that. But I mean, if like I said, if you're going to ask him to play off ball, I think you're asking for a world of hurt. And like I said, I know I'm going to be in a small camp by myself there, but
I mean, that's all right. I'm glad you brought it up about Tulsa, because no one really knows where Tulsa's at. But when you look at defensive players, kind of like when I look at wide receivers, if they're crushing it in the MAC or they're crushing it in the Mountain West, you kind of have to be like, okay, well, who are they playing, right? Like their ability and what they're doing. I don't know if you remember a kid named Frank Ginda. Do you remember Frank Ginda from San Jose State? So I just know him because he's from my area. So he led the Mountain West with 173 tackles at San Jose State one year, and he left early as a junior because he thought he was going to be a draft pick, and he went undrafted. And in the most recent, he was playing in the XFL, I believe. And I used ever since that story, and he's a great kid and he did very well, but ever since that story, always gets me thinking about these little school guys, and they do very well and they're stat stuffers, and then they get to the NFL and they get hit in the mouth a little bit. So do you take that? It sounds like you take that into account when you're looking at these
guys. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, I don't think he played anybody, worth mentioning. So that would have been nice to see if he got to play like an Alabama or anybody school, even like a Power 5, anything would have been great. But no, he is the definition of a boomer bust prospect.
Okay.
He is either going to be the steal of the draft, or he's going to be, a backup in the league for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, that's fair.
And then last guy I'll touch on quick is Nick Bolton. I like him a lot. He's, probably my linebacker 3 of the class. But the one thing I noticed about him is his instincts are very good. He is a guy that, I would say his instincts and play rec, or maybe just his instincts even, are better than Micah Parsons. Like, he just has a knack for the ball. The one knock on that is he will live and die by that. He will either, guess on a play and be, kind of in no man's land for the rest of the play, or he'll, knock out the ball carrier in the backfield. There's not a lot of in between. He usually ends up right, but like I said, he lives and dies by that. Okay tackler, a little undersized as well, I believe, pound for pound at least. But another good prospect. A guy I like. So.
All right, yeah. Let's get to the real love. My real love is my corners in this draft. I think we're going to go towards that trend with the Dallas drafts, and I think there's 3 really, really elite corners in this draft that I really like. Who I know Surtain. I'm sure you're going to talk about him. I'd like you to talk about him first, because I think he's that dude. He's that lockdown corner that these NFL teams need, and he's someone that I really liked his tape. I just love watching that kid play. What do you think of Surtain?
I don't know if he has that much lockdown in his game, but I do think he is a excellent corner, because he might not lock a guy down, but if he does allow a catch, he's not letting him get away. And that was something that I liked in his film, is when he tackles you, he will tackle you through the ground.
Yeah.
And he's a guy who he's willing to help out and run support and come and smack a guy in the mouth. And that's what I'm about. If you can play, a corner and do that, he to me is, we touched on it earlier, that corners aren't usually that viable in IDP.
Yeah.
There's a select few, and they're usually not good corners. They're usually bad corners who allow catches, and either then, or they get thrown at a lot, so they pass deflect, or they tackle the guy after the ball is caught, or push him out of the bounds. Take your pick. Not a lot of corners are viable. You trickle down a little bit, or tone it down a little bit, but it is for the most part accurate. But I love Surtain. I think I have him mocked number 4 to the Atlanta Falcons. And I thought that was going to be super bold. I was like, I'm going to be the only one doing this, and everyone's going to laugh at me. And then Lance Zierlein, whatever it is, of NFL comes out. I see on his little ticker, Patrick Surtain, number 4, and I'm like, now I feel smart because I did that all on my own. Well, and that was just looking at Atlanta's defense last year, and just they were the most yards allowed passing in the league. They were pretty high in yards per pass completion. And I'm like, they could use a corner. And I'm like, and he's honestly, I think he's a blue chip prospect for me, top tier guy for me. But again, I don't know that he's really that lockdown guy. Okay. I think well, don't worry, we'll talk about Caleb Farley. I think Caleb Farley is more of a lockdown guy than Surtain is. And, I think, like I said, he's better at playing off. He can play man, but he's more of to me, it seemed like he's more of I'll allow the catch, but then I'm going to go get this guy. And, transitioning now to Caleb Farley, like I said, I think he's probably, if you want to talk a guy that has, I'm not going to say Jalen Ramsey because that's way too high of a comp. But if you want to talk about a guy that has, Jair Alexander type ability, Caleb Farley's that dude. And he's only playing in his like 3rd or 4th year as a corner. He was a high school quarterback, and I looked up his stats, and I'm like, this dude balled out in high school as a quarterback, and he had like 40 some rushing touchdowns in a season, and I'm like, this like ridiculous. And then only 20 passing touchdowns on top of it, but like, hey, and I don't know who he's playing out there, but man, I was impressed with that. That just shows athleticism. And then he goes and plays corner, and he's like, hey, I'm pretty good at this too. And like I said, I think he's only going to develop his game a little more. I think he could be a little handsy, but that's just part of his game. And that's a part of, you look at shutdown corners, they're handsy. They're guys that are going to get up in your grill, get you off your route, and then play defense, in terms of where you're going. And Caleb Farley has that. And I mentioned I did a draft profile on him. He has the innate ability to get between the ball and the wide receiver. He just has it. His closing speed is excellent. And then it's just, he could be 5 yards away from the play, and it just seems like he's going to find a way between you and the ball, either to deflect it or catch it. Dude's a stud. I really like him, and I was close to putting him ahead of Surtain, but I just think Surtain's just kind of better for what that defense needs.
Yeah.
And like I said, Surtain has some of that potential too, but I really think Farley is that guy he's going to shut you down more likely than not. And he's not as big a tackle guy as Surtain is. He's not a guy who's going to come up and pop a dude in the mouth just because.
Yeah.
He's a guy all right, they're coming over to me, which is fine. Like I said, so I don't think he's going to be as great of an IDP asset, but he is going to be likely a stud at the next level. I think he'll need a year to kind of get into it, get some polish. So he might be decent year one, but I really think, in the long run of things, I really, really like Farley.
I love Farley. When I watch him, and you got to read his piece. Bob writes some very good pieces over there, and you got to make sure you see it and I loved it. The word that comes to mind every time I watch him play is he's an athlete. That dude is just a playmaker. Like I just love I feel like his ceiling is higher than Surtain's. Now I'm not a expert or anything like that. I think Surtain is like a dude, and he's going to be a very solid NFL player. But Farley could be that next generational, like, hey, this guy can just go all over the field and just make plays. And when you watch his tape, and now he is raw, like, he hasn't played that position, but the thing that makes he was such a dominant athlete at that position, and he hasn't even really, year and a half, maybe? Like, it's
I think 2 or 3 full years.
Yeah.
Total.
So he's still learning, right? He's still getting in there and doing those things. So I love Farley. Farley is someone that I really like, and I've enjoyed. I was a big Surtain at 10. Now I'm like, I'll be cool with Farley if he can make it there. I don't think he's gonna. I think he's gonna go before 10, but I loved him as a prospect. I think Farley is that guy for this class.
Yep, I agree. I think his ceiling is higher than Surtain's. I think Surtain is more of the day one, book it, he's good.
Yeah,
but especially playing in the SEC, I think that's a huge benefit to him. But I think Farley is going to need at least a year probably to polish up. But like I said, Jair Alexander, he has a lot of Richard Sherman in his game. That was my high comp in my article.
You're getting me excited, Bob. You're getting me way too excited here. And then when he gets taken off the board before my Cowboys, I'm going to be sad.
I got him at number 9.
I know. Damn it. I just want them to draft a quarterback. That's all I want them to do.
Yeah.
I want Denver to get a quarterback.
I think Mac Jones is a sneaky landing spot for Denver, honestly.
Okay. Look at you dropping that knowledge in here.
Probably in a camp all by myself there too, but
that's all right. It's cool to be on your own island. It's fine. That's how you do these things. What about safety for you? Like this is a weird safety class. So just a couple guys who catches your eye a little bit.
Very similar to the DN group where there's there's no Jamal Adams in this class. There's the guy I mentioned, Hamza, Nigel Dean, Andre Cisco, who we'll talk about in a little bit, Paris Ford, and then Richie Grant and Trayvon Morrig. Those are probably the big 5. There's a couple more in there that I'm not really too high on, but I'll start with Trayvon Morrig. He reminds me of when I first watched him. He reminded me a lot of like Jesse Bates in terms of Jesse Bates of the Bengals. He's not your box safety. He's your deep cover guy, so he's not, and when I see that, I kind of get, not turned off in the scouting process, but I'm like, well, he's not really going to be an IDP prospect. He's going to be more of a real life prospect that, he'll make plays here and there, but he's not going to be anything worth having on my fantasy team. So I get kind of like, whatever. But no, he's got some skill. He's got some ball skill. He's a guy too who finds the way between between the ball and the wide receiver, especially deep. But Richie Grant, same way. I like him a little more. I think he's so instinctual to play. He's going to be like a center field guy. He can tackle, but he's not going to be your box safety. He's going to be your free, but he's one I think could make a few more plays downfield. He's more willing tackler than Morrig was. The one thing that I'll go circle back to him, I guess, was the big turnoff for me was he kind of shies away from going and tackling, and which is fine. I mean, that's just not his game, but I think that might hurt him a little at the next level.
Yeah. But
back to Grant, able tackler, willing tackler. You don't want him going against your Derrick Henrys of the world, but your like slot Scotty Miller types or outside Scotty Miller types, you can throw him on. Then we talked about Hamza, and then we'll talk about Cisco, and then Paris Ford out of Pitt. Pitt had a really good defense this year, or the past couple years even. But Paris Ford, I'm not big on him. There's some big followings for him, but I'm not in the camp. I think you're hoping he's a good downhill box safety, but he can't cover, and I don't think he tackles that well, and he's kind of scrawny. So I'm not big on him, but
okay.
Any of those guys you want to dive more into at all?
We're gonna dive into a few guys real quick because we got a little bit of time left, and some guys that I wanted him to kind of really focus on, guys that I've watched, and again, it's the guys I kind of wanted a little bit know more about, just because I think they have potential. Is Andre Cisco from Syracuse. The thing about him is I know he dealt with injuries, and I know that. Again, when you're looking at the safety position for me in this class, I'm looking for the high upside athletes. Can they kind of succeed expectations? Can they what do you expect from him? So what do you think of Cisco when you watched him? What do you see from him?
I like Cisco. He was, like you said, highly athletic, good instincts, but again, he kind of lives and dies by those from time to time. But I mean, he's a guy he comes up and tackles, and that's what, you really want. Coverage, he was okay. Not really his strong suit, in my opinion. He could do zone okay, where he can pick up a guy and kind of trail with him. But for the most part, I like him. I'm slightly concerned about the ACL. I couldn't see if it was a tear or if it was just an injury. And then he decided to opt out. All I saw was that it was an ACL injury. I couldn't find a dang thing on saying if it was a for sure tear or not.
I think it was reported tear. I think. Okay. I think it was a tear. Yeah, I think he tore it.
I mean, it only makes sense. So I would be concerned. It's probably going to hurt his draft stock. I think he's a day two guy for sure still. but I'm kind of expecting him to have like a Julian Blackman of the Colts, where he tore his ACL late last season, heading into the draft, and took all year to basically get right. He was actually able to start or able to play by mid-season at the latest, I think, and he came on well. I think if he's in a good system and where there's a need, that he could get in sooner rather than later. I mean, he tore his in October, I believe, so he's got almost a year, which is usually the minimum to come back from. So I don't know how much of OTAs or training camp he's going to be able to hit, if they're even going to have him. But if he's able to even sit in Zoom calls, that's better than nothing.
Yeah.
But so that might actually be good for him, oddly enough. But if he can't play anyway, so I mean, I like him. I think he needs some polish, but he is your high upside guy for this class. Yeah. And the low, he has a downside too. But I think at worst, he's an athletic prospect. He's got the instincts. He's a tackler. He's gonna go hit a dude. Not much. I'm fine. No.
He's okay. I like his athletic profile, and I like what I saw. The next guy that I want to talk about is my plant my flag guy, because I went on a podcast recently with another group, and I said, this is my guy, and they all laughed at me. So I want him to succeed because I believe in Marvin Wilson from FSU. I think that he played on a shitty Florida State team that couldn't profile him very well. They didn't really have a defensive structure out there that really what they were doing, a scheme just didn't fit him. Marvin Wilson had a pretty good Senior Bowl showing, and he looked good. So what do you think of Marvin?
I like him. I think the problem with him is there's going to be a lot of recency bias because he had a terrible 2020, didn't play in a lot of games, played like not well in those games. But if you look at his 2018 and his 2019 seasons, excellent player. And for an interior defensive lineman, he had excellent seasons. If he had a similar or better season with the production jump he had between the two seasons, you'd be talking about him mid first round at the latest. Yeah. And I still think he has some first round potential. I think it's later or early day 2, mid day 2 maybe. But no, I like him. The guy's a fighter. That was my first blurb on him was he's a fighter. He is, get your hands off me type of mentality. And he moves people. He's a big dude. He has the power to absorb double teams. I also wrote that he eats double teams. That's one of my favorite things to say about interior defensive linemen. And then he, he has that high motor, which is huge. He's not a guy who's going to give up on a play, and that'll lead to him, producing more. Yeah. And he's a guy who he'll put the center, he'll put the guard in the quarterback's lap. And that's, whether he gets a sack for it or not, TBD. But, to be able to do that is pretty impressive. And like I said, there's going to be a lot of recency bias for him this year because he, the level of play was not what it was the 2 years prior. So
those of you who haven't seen him, he's 6'5", 300. He's a big boy. I love that interior defensive lineman. I think he can be a run stuffer. I think he can kind of set the tone for your defense on that side. And we just talked about Aaron Donald. Now, I'm not comparing him to Aaron Donald, but I'm saying he could give that defense what you need at that spot, at that interior defensive line, provide your linebackers and that team to kind of get free space. And he's someone that can clog that middle. So I really like Marvin Wilson, and I'm rooting for him because I feel like he kind of got the shit end of the stick this year because I felt like that team wasn't very good, and he did have a productive year. Another guy that I wanted to kind of talk about. Now, you've talked about Pittsburgh, is my guy Rashad Weaver, from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh should have been a lot better, Bob. I don't understand, Pickett. What are you doing over there, Kenny Pickett? Just throwing picks or what?
Yeah.
What's happening over there?
Pickett, yeah.
He's terrible. What do you think of Rashad?
Yeah, I hadn't watched film on him until you brought him up. And I actually really like him. He's got kind of that, well, okay, I'll read off my notes here, so I don't try to go off that. So he's got the long arms, which is awesome. He has great instincts. The one play that stood out to me a lot, aside from, all the great ones, was there was a play where he was rushing the passer, had the edge, and it turned out to be a screen play. And he could have just bolted at the quarterback, And instead, he's like, oh, they're throwing a screen to my side. So he backed up and waited for the quarterback to throw it and swatted it right out of the air. And I'm like, that's the kind of stuff, that's that next level thinking that in the NFL is going to be super valuable. Because like I said, he had the quarterback dead to rights, was pass rushing. It wasn't like okay, this is my coverage stance. It was, he was pass rushing. He swam move the right tackle, and he's like, oh, in a split second, he made that adjustment to go swat the ball out of the air, get into position to do so. But so I really like that. And then playmaker, goes right along with that. He was able to, I looked at a stat column, he fills in all those auxiliary stats outside of tackles and sacks. And his jump from, I believe it was his sophomore to junior year or junior year to senior year, whichever it was, the last 2 years, he was very efficient the last 2 years by comparison between the 2 years. So I actually, like I said, thanks for putting me on him earlier rather than later, because I really like looking at his film.
Hey, look at that. I gave the IDP guys someone to look at. See, guys, I know this stuff. Come on. I mean, I think he could be an edge rusher. And I think that he's 6'5", 270. He's a big boy. And I think that he kind of has that. So I like him. And I think that in kind of a down class, I think he could be one of those guys later round. I don't know where he's going to get picked. There's some guys that had him mocked pretty high, and then there's some guys that have him mocked in day 2. It'll be interesting kind of what his pro day looks like. But again, I think he kind of fits both molds. I think he could play maybe outside linebacker as well, and maybe he can fit there. I think he's versatile. Yeah,
I think I'd like him as a edge stand-up outside linebacker hybrid, where he can kind of drop into coverage and cover the flat, or the short slant, whatever it is. He can kind of fill that gap for you too. So I don't mind. I think he's a good prospect. I think I got him going probably day 2, just because there's a lot of day 1 talent. It's not. I could see him in the first round. I could see him early second. It's kind of, when you get into these mocks, everything after pick probably 15 is, who do you like?
Yeah.
There's so few, picks that are really, nailed down in that range. After doing mocks the last 3 years and getting really dedicated to them, that's what I've learned, is that after pick 15 or so, it's really up in the air. Usually 1 to 15, the consensus is fairly accurate. But when you get after that, it's a lot of who do you like, just because of, there's so many prospects to go through. And that's kind of like your 15 to 50 is almost one tier of players. Yeah. Almost, in a way. Similar to in fantasy drafts where there's tiers, you're kind of sitting in the second tier. And it's a big one. You have a lot of great, elite players in that top 12, 15 range. And you have a lot of great players in the following. So,
yeah, no, I think you're fair. I think that's fair. And also, like, mock drafts, guys, we don't really, after like probably the top 10, we're guessing. We're like, okay, these are the guys that we think fit. But, God, we don't know. I mean, you still got the Bears drafting out there. Who knows who the Bears are taking? Like, there's teams that you're just like, why did you just take that guy? I don't understand, what are you doing with that? And so I think you make a fair point there with those guys. You go ahead.
Yeah, and you got the Packers drafting out there, too, that you can't figure out a draft to save their souls. So.
Every time I write a player profile for my website on wide receivers, I always put teams, and I always put the Packers, because I'm just like, hey, maybe I will will them to get a wide receiver. One of these days, I feel like I'm going to will them. All right, well, we're going to go through one more guy. I know we had a few more down, but I have one more guy because, we're catching up on time here. I'm going to do the guy that I forgot to put the third, but my guy is Bobby Brown the third from Texas A&M. I just love Bobby Brown because that dude's massive, and he's a lot of fun to watch. What did you think? What did you see? Obviously, interior D lineman, probably a one technique guy, but what do you think about him?
Yeah, so he's going to be more than likely a nose tackle at the next level. Yeah. I don't see a lot of versatility out of him, but he is a big dude, and he sneaky athletic. The one red flag, or a couple red flags I had, is that it didn't seem like he really cared until this season. His junior or senior year, whatever it was. Which could be that he was on a much better team, so it's like, okay, I want to perform now, or maybe it's the element of, hey, maybe if I do well, I'll get drafted, or hey, maybe I have talent, I should put it to good use. But he's a big boy. He moves guys. He's strong, and like you said, he's fun to watch because he's he will move people. He will also eat double teams. And he was fun to watch. I wasn't able to find a ton of footage on him, unfortunately, just because of the position and how much he got to play. But man, I liked what I saw. I just think he's probably an early day 3 at best, in my opinion, for draft wise. But he's a sneaky guy, sneaky grab. Where on that interior defensive line, it's such a teardrop after the top 3 guys in the league. You're looking at a big tier of probably 30 guys in the league, starters in the league that, so I mean, he's a guy that if he gets a shot and he makes the most of it, he could be something, but he's going to be a little limited on the plays, the packages he's in and whatnot, but he's a fun prospect to keep an eye on. So
the thing I always do with scouting, I'm a coach, so I always think of intangibles. I feel like he lacks that a little. Like you said, the effort thing kind of worries me a little bit. I love his size, and it's one of those things. If you can figure it out, maybe he can be that dominant interior defensive lineman, kind of step up, eat double teams. I'm gonna steal that from you from now on. So eat double teams.
I love it, man. Have that.
Perfect. I'm taking it. Eat double teams and do those type of things, So I appreciate you talking about the prospects. I think I kind of know your answer on this, but if you were, so I know IDP rookie drafts include rookies for offense, but let's just say, okay, who is your first defensive player off the board for you? And I think it's Parsons, but you can tell me that. Is it Parsons?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be Parsons. I think he's the one that's he's independent of landing spot. He's not going to need – some of these guys could easily change based on where they land. JOK, if he lands in a bad spot, he might not be my LB2. He might be my LB3 or 4. But Parsons, he's solidified. He's a, bona fide playmaker. None of the defensive linemen are going to be in consideration, sadly. The DBs, same kind of deal. Being so ambiguous in those positions – none of them are going to be, worthwhile of your first IDP pick. But Parsons is one of those guys that he's gonna get in. He's gonna be able to be a day 1 guy more than likely. He could get the Isaiah Simmons out of Arizona treatment, where they kind of ride the bench for the first year and figure out the NFL defense. However, the one case with Isaiah Simmons was he had played all over the field for Clemson. So it's not like he played linebacker religiously for his time at college. He played corner, he played safety, he played edge, he played linebacker. A linebacker was actually one of the least positions he played.
Yeah.
But Parsons, he's a day 1 guy. He's kind of similar to Isaiah Simmons in the way that he's kind of a do-it-all, jack of all trades, but his skill is more in pass rushing than it is coverage. Where it is for Simmons. Simmons is more of a coverage guy. He can rush a passer. He has the speed for it, but that's just he's going to be there to take away the tight end. He's going to be there to take away a slot guy, or run support. That's going to be his deal. Over there. But Mike Parsons is the one for me, and I don't think anything will change that. So
you've been talking about Parsons so much, it makes me just want to go watch some. I might watch his tape tonight. So good for you. Like, these are one of these things is, when you're looking at IDP and drafts, you guys, Bob's been one of the best guests we've had on here. Just he's really smart, he's intelligent, and he's someone that you definitely need to follow. I know that if you have social media, if you're on Twitter, you definitely need to follow him. He's at @BobVan_IDP. He just did a new networking name brand change because he knew that he's gonna blow up. So he's got to make sure that name's a little smaller. So I like that. Go check out his work at Fantasy Six Pack. He's a contributor to Dynasty Rewind. Definitely follow those guys. They're excellent guys over there. I really love what they do. Bob, why don't you tell us what's down the pipe? What are you working on next that is coming out and something for them to take a look at?
So a lot of my stuff coming out before the draft will be mock drafts and draft profiles for the incoming rookies. I'll be doing ones on Kwity Paye. I'll be doing Patrick Jones, Zaven Collins. Pretty much every guy we mentioned here will be either done at Fantasy Six Pack or on the Dynasty Rewind Patreon. Between the two, I'll have a good amount of people covered. And then mock drafts, we'll be doing a lot of coverage at Dynasty Rewind with mock drafts for the fantasy season, as well as we're probably going to get some together for the NFL mock draft, kind of based on what we would do, kind of what we think is going to happen, and we might also take a look at the so-called professional mock drafts, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, so I'm going to be a very busy man in the coming months. But hey, this is my favorite part of the NFL season to an extent. I started back in August, and I went through the in-season grind, which was crazy. I was pumping out 5 articles a week at one point, and now it's a little different where I can kind of pick and choose to an extent what I'm helping out with and whatnot. So no, it's been a blast. I really enjoy working with the guys at Dynasty Rewind, and I just want to thank, and obviously Fantasy Six Pack too, for giving me the platform to start with. But again, thanks for having me. This was awesome. Happy to be here anytime. You know where to reach me. So
yeah, no. Hey man, you did great. I really appreciated it. And if you're not following him for IDP stuff, you're doing it wrong. He's someone that I'm going to definitely be following. And if I get in a league, he's the guy I'm going to be following, asking him, and I'm probably going to annoy the hell out of him, saying, hey, what is this guy looking like? He's going to be getting, so I'm going to slide in his DMs a lot, probably trying to get him to help me out with these drafts. My
DMs are always open, and they will stay open. I'm happy to help.
Yeah.
I might not get back to you in 5 minutes, but I'm pretty good with same-day replies. I'm happy to help. My ultimate goal with this whole thing is to, spread the love of my love for IDP, and then, kind of familiarize people with the IDP formats, as well as, kind of popularize it as much as I can. Because like I said, I really feel it really embodies the game well and makes you more of a fan of the game.
Yeah.
So
no, hey man, that's fair, and I think everybody needs to get involved a little bit in this and follow him. He's gonna blow it up. He's gonna blow up big. I'm telling you. I'm just along for the ride. My old butt here. Now everybody else that's listening to the podcast, please rate, review if you like what you hear. If you don't like, just move on. But you should like it because it's good content. And if you're watching on the YouTube channel, we're just uploading that now. We're getting that started. So if you hear it, give us a like. Leave a comment. Tell us what you think, and we really appreciate your support. So I hope everybody had a great time listening to this. I did. I got smarter. That's the point of all this, is getting smarter. So we will see you guys down the next.
Did you get all that? If not, make sure you head over to Hammercast.com, subscribe, and join the Hammer Nation. Until next time, keep grinding.